Welcome to the Houston Bar Association Appellate Practice Section. I'm Meredith Parenti, the chair of the section, and we are delighted to have you here to join us today for our program on diversity, advocacy, and action. So I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then we will let them get started with the program. Justice Ava Guzman will be serving as our moderator today. She has served at 3 levels of the Texas judiciary. She began her judicial service on the 309th District Court in Harris County following an appointment by then Governor George W. Bush. Justice Guzman then moved on to serve on the Houston-based 14th Court of Appeals for almost a decade. In 2009, she was appointed to serve on the Supreme Court of Texas by Governor Rick Perry. She was elected to a full term in November 2010, becoming the first Hispanic woman elected to statewide office in Texas. In 2016, she made history twice more. She received the most votes ever in a Texas Republican Party primary with 1.27 million votes and won re-election that November with a record-setting 4.88 million votes. At that time, the highest vote total for any office in Texas election history. Now in her 20th year on the bench, Justice Guzman has consistently received high marks in judicial evaluation polls. Justice Guzman's devotion to law and her community has been recognized by national, state, and local organizations. She is a recipient of the Hispanic Bar Association of Houston's Lifetime Achievement Award and was named Appellate Judge of the Year in 2016 by the Texas Association of Civil Trial and Appellate Specialists. The John Ben Shepherd Public Leadership Institute awarded Justice Guzman its prestigious 2015 Outstanding Texas Leader Award. The Texas Advocacy Project recognized Justice Guzman as a community leader committed to ending power-based personal violence with a 2016 Vision Award. She is the 2014 recipient of the Women and the Law section of the State Bar of Texas's Sarah T. Hughes Lawyers of Achievement Award, and a 2014 recipient of the Association of Women Attorneys Premier Women in Law Modern Trailblazer Award. Her alma mater, South Texas College of Law, recognized Justice Guzman's significant career accomplishments and community leadership with an Alumni Impact Award in 2014. The National Hispanic Bar Association honored Justice Guzman with a Latina Judge of the Year Award in 2009. Justice Guzman holds Pathfinder Awards from both the Travis County Women Lawyers Association and Texas Women Lawyers, and was an early recipient of the Texas Executive Women on the Move Award. She's a senior fellow of the American Leadership Forum and has a long track record of community service and has devoted many volunteer hours to organizations committed to children. As chair of the Supreme Court of Texas Permanent Judicial Commission on Children, Youth, and Families, she has worked with leaders across the state to improve outcomes of safety and permanency and to foster the well-being of Texas's most vulnerable children and families. Justice Guzman is the court's liaison to the Texas Access to Justice Commission, and she has previously served on the boards of the Texas Court-appointed Special Advocates, the Escape Center, the Wesley Community Center, and the Houston area chapter of the American Red Cross. Justice Guzman's service has not been limited to judicial work. She has been a member of the Board of Trustees of the Center for American and International Law and the Board of Trustees for South Texas College of Law. She serves on the board of Career Spring, an organization devoted to establishing networking and career opportunities for first-generation college students. And since 2005, she's been a member of the American Law Institute. Before taking the bench, Justice Guzman enjoyed a successful 10-year litigation career in Houston. She holds a BBA from the University of Houston a JD from South Texas College of Law, and an LLM from Duke University School of Law. She is married to Antonio Guzman, a retired police officer, and they have one daughter who is also a lawyer. Next, we have Justice Gina Benavides, who was first elected to the 13th Court of Appeals in 2006 and was reelected to a second 6-year term in 2012, and most recently was elected to her third 6-year term in 2018. She is happy to announce that she has recently published an article in the St. Mary's Journal on legal malpractice and ethics entitled "The Texas Standards for Appellate Conduct, an Annotated Guide and Commentary," with her former staff attorney, Joshua Caldwell. In 2019, Justice Benavides was elected by her peers to chair the judicial section of the State Bar of Texas. In her capacity as chair of that section, she serves as a liaison to the State Bar of Texas, the Texas Bar Foundation, and the Texas Center for the Judiciary. In 2008, Justice Benavides was appointed to serve on the Texas Center for the Judiciary Board of Directors. The Texas Center provides continuing judicial education programs for the state's judiciary and support personnel. In 2011, she was elected chair of the Texas Center by her fellow judges, the first Hispanic female to hold this position. In 2013, Justice Benavides received the Chair's Award of Excellence from the Texas Center. She continues to serve as the Texas Center's judicial liaison to the State Bar of Texas's judicial section. In 2010, the Texas Supreme Court appointed Justice Benavides to the Texas Access for Justice Commission. In February of 2012, Justice Benavides was appointed to the Solutions 2012 Task Force. And the National Hispanic Bar Association in 2007 named Justice Benavides the Latina Judge of the Year. Justice Benavides is also involved in the Hispanic Issues section of the State Bar of Texas and was named their Judge of the Year in 2014. And in 2018, she served as chair of the Hispanic Issues section. Justice Benavides currently serves on the board of the Appellate section for the State Bar of Texas, and she chairs the Appellate Diversity Subcommittee. She also serves on the Pattern Jury Charge on Damages. She continues to ensure that Texans have access to justice by sitting on the board of the Texas Legal Services Commission and the Legislative Committee of the Texas Access for Justice Commission. Justice Benavides serves an active role in the State Bar of Texas, the National Association of Women Judges, the Hidalgo County Bar Association, and the Texas Women Lawyers. She's past president of the Mexican American Bar Association of Texas, past president of the Cameron County Bar Association, and a former vice president of the Texas Association of Defense Counsel. She frequently serves as a speaker and presenter across the state. Justice Benavides is originally from Corpus Christi, and she graduated with a Bachelor's of Business Administration from the University of Texas in Austin. She then attended law school at the University of Houston Law Center and was admitted to the bar in 1988. Justice Benavides resides in Corpus Christi with her husband, Sammy, and she's the proud mother of 3 children and 3 grandchildren. So welcome.
Thank you.
Next, we have Justice Sarah Beth Landau, who was elected to the First Court of Appeals in 2018. Before taking the bench, Justice Landau worked in the Appeals Division of the Harris County Public Defender's Office, and for 10 years as an assistant federal public defender doing trial and appellate work. Justice Landau has over 20 years of legal experience and has handled over 600 appeals as an advocate in state and federal courts. She's the first public defender to be elected to the court. A frequent presenter on criminal law issues and appellate advocacy, Justice Landau taught appellate litigation for 6 years at the Thurgood Marshall School of Law. Justice Landau worked for several years in complex commercial litigation at Vincent and Elkins here in Houston and at Couder Brothers in New York. She clerked for the Honorable Vanessa Gilmore in the Southern District of Texas after graduating from Columbia University School of Law. She studied political science and quantitative economics at the University of Minnesota, graduating cum laude and as a member of Phi Beta Kappa. She worked her way through college and a Tokyo study abroad program, doing odd jobs, including but not limited to janitor, honors academic advisor, commercial radio DJ, personal ad taker, and sandwich artist. So we have a great panel for you today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Justice Guzman. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, Meredith, for the introductions, and what an honor it is for me to be here with such illustrious, accomplished colleagues. And you were very generous, Meredith, to take the time for those introductions. And thank you, a very special thank you to Whitney Brick for her leadership in bringing us together today to engage in a dialogue about building a more diverse appellate bar. It's really the perfect time to begin to think about what we can do as a community to improve the diversity in our bar. And I also, of course, want to thank the Houston Bar Association Appellate section for your continued devotion to the appellate bar, the legal community as a whole. We're all the fortunate recipients of your great work. I'm going to begin the discussion today by highlighting a few statistics that reflect what I think we all know, and that's that the same lack of diversity that affects the legal profession is more noticeable and more marked in the appellate space. I hope that the conversation that we'll have today allows us to share our experiences, to explore the issues a little more in depth, and that it will inspire us to action. So I'm going to lead the discussion with the statistics, and then we're each going to share a few observations about why diversity matters from our own perspective. Then we'll move on to how we think diversity impacts the courts and the cases, our justice system, and conclude with some concrete steps that we can take together to hopefully change course as a profession. So let me turn to slide 1. Right. So I'm going to compare most of my numbers to 2010. So as you can see, our lawyer population is about 1.3 million active US lawyers. That's up about 10% from 2010. And the growth that, as we'll see in the next slide, continues to be primarily white men and to a lesser degree, white women. 86% of lawyers are non-Hispanic white people. And I say that because Hispanics are classified sometimes as white. By comparison, roughly 60% of US residents are non-Hispanic white people. That's that slide. Let you take a look at that and take that in for a minute. And then we'll look at the percentage of female lawyers on the next slide. So the percentage of female lawyers has increased slowly over the past decade, 31% in 2010 versus 37% in 2020. That's about a 6% increase. And you can see how that compares to the total US population. We'll go ahead and include the rest of the stats. So if we're looking at the gains in lawyers among people of color, for Black lawyers, there's not been a whole lot of change from 2010. There's been no change. This is approximate, but we're still right at about 5%. If we're looking at the total number of Hispanic lawyers, that's up roughly a little less than 4%. So 5% of the total lawyers in the United States are Hispanic. Only 2% of that number are females, Hispanic women. So not much growth there either. As a legal community, Asian lawyers, that you see a little more growth there. It's up you see a little less growth, 0.4%. About 2% of the lawyers are Asian American, and Native American. We actually have seen that population decrease in number. And so when you look at law firm leadership, the gains are pretty slow. The number of female equity partners was about 21% in 2019, according to the National Association of Women Lawyers, and that's up from 15% in 2012. And next slide. So law firm leadership in 2009, 6% were people of color. In 2019, 10% people of color. So in Texas, our data is a little better. 10% or so of our lawyers are Hispanic and 4% are women. I don't have a slide for that, but Texas is doing better than the national average. But what we see, and what I think really makes this conversation so important, is while the lawyer population is growing, it's not keeping pace with the way our communities of color are growing in population. And so it's important. And I'm going to turn to my colleagues to talk about, why it's important. Why is diversity important? And Justice Benavides, I'll start with you.
Well, I think that's a great question to talk about, and we have to continue to have that conversation. And the conversation starts when we look at diversity, really looking at first, because the legal community tends to be behind the business community. And that's what we've learned from the business community and the corporations that we look around in corporate America, is that they have been teaching us for years that diversity gives us such a bigger or larger range of talent, and it allows different perspectives to enter into a discussion. And that type of diversity from all areas, whether it's gender or cultural or background or experience, is so critical. And those of us who work in the appellate judiciary fully understand that, because we all work as one, but we come from, if you're talking about Justice Guzman, 9 different people with 9 different experiences and backgrounds. And if you talk about us, it's 6, and we all come from different backgrounds. And the best conversations that we can have when we're discussing whether it is what does a statutory interpretation mean, or what is the effect of our opinion, is to have those discussions from different backgrounds. Whether I'm discussing it with Justice Contreras or Justice Hinojosa, who come from a different background, or even Justice Jaime Tejerina, who has a military background and brings a whole different perspective to our court. And we have to embrace that as a judiciary, and we have to embrace that as an appellate bar, and recognize it that it will make us better and stronger. And I think that's why why it's so important. And the discussion we need to have every day, all day long, and remind ourselves of it.
I agree with everything you just said, Justice Benavides. And I'd like to add that not only are clients ahead of the bar and the judiciary in terms of diversity, I think the young lawyers are too. As they're coming in, I know a lot of lawyers, they want to work somewhere that has good diversity, even if they themselves are, white and male. I just saw something, both Justice Guzman and I are fans of Appellate Twitter, and it's sort of an interesting passive way to learn about people in other parts of the legal sector. And I saw a white man tweet that you know, he felt a little ridiculous, but he didn't want to be the fifth white man at this law firm that he was potentially interviewing at, which consisted of 4 white men. So that is sort of maybe a surprising take to some people.
So I agree with both of those comments. And I think when you think about diversity on the bench or in the appellate bar, you know, I do think there's something to be said for the fact that diversity broadens perspectives and it provides insights from people with different life experiences. So you're arguing an issue to the court that you know, let's just say that it goes to the heart of some of the issues that we're all thinking about these days. It is helpful to have a person that has that perspective or that background. And the other reason, we serve a diverse population. And I think when you think about whether people or communities have confidence in the justice system, if communities of color are not seeing people that look like them on the bench, making the important appellate arguments, that says something to them. And I think it impacts the trust that they have in the justice system. And we're talking about ethnic diversity, gender diversity, men and women bring different perspectives, but so do people of different ages, races, cultures, economic backgrounds. People that hail from different parts of the state bring different geographic and regional perspectives, and they bring it to issues that impact all Texans. So I think as an appellate bar, our advocacy and our delivery of opinions that the public will accept will benefit from more diversity. I am happy, I guess, to live in a state where our judiciary is now more diverse than it's ever been, and particularly on the appellate benches. I think we're seeing more diversity than we've ever seen. And I think as Texans, we all strive for that and benefit from that. And moving on.
I wanted to follow up because you took the words right out of my mouth, is that we can't forget the judiciary and what the public sees, and for them to have trust in the judiciary is that they have to see the world in themselves. And so when they walk through the courts of the courtroom, it should look like the population looks. And I think that goes back to the statistics that you showed us, Justice Guzman, and how important it is that we continue to strive for that diversity so that we can make the numbers match. I mean, it should be that look at itself as to what the United States looks like.
It's important, you know, we have kids all over the state that are looking for, you know, what do I dream of being when I grow up? Where do I want to be when I grow up? As an appellate bar, I think we have an obligation to all of these young people in you know, elementary school and high schools and junior high schools, for them to see a bar that reflects people like them. So it's important for that reason too. But
and
Justice
even more
Landau,
so, oh, sorry, just let me
go ahead.
I'll
Please,
let you talk.
No.
Let me take over the conversation.
Oh, I'm glad.
It's really
Thank you.
important for the appellate bar, even more so. You know, we look at statistically what the state bar, what minority lawyers do in an overall. If we just focus in on the minority, I think that the numbers even shrink more. We've looked at those in the past. I know that Justice Guzman and I have looked at those in the past. And I think that we need to acknowledge to the bar itself that here's an area of the bar that needs to become even more diverse than the state bar needs to become. That's it.
Absolutely. And Justice Landau, I was going to ask you a little bit, I know you're going to talk about this a little bit later, but maybe we can lead in with this because we are talking to an audience of lawyers, very sophisticated lawyers with practices that we greatly admire. But what is the role of an appellate lawyer? And I guess we can hone in on the appellate bar, where I know we've talked among ourselves about the lack of diversity in the appellate bar. So what do you see as the role of lawyers, Justice Lindo?
I think as lawyers, we can and should lead from where we stand, which means if you see something, you can do something about it wherever you happen to be from. Not everybody is a natural teacher and mentor, but you can kind of be an accidental mentor if you just kind of pay attention. If someone asks, what is your practice area? You can tell them more about what you do, and they might not even realize that is because it's a specialized area of litigation that not everybody is aware of, being in law school certainly, and even being out of law school for several years.
Agreed. And Justice Benavides, please weigh in on that if you want to. But then I want to think about the challenges to addressing diversity. Why don't we talk about it more? I commend the HBA for having the conversation, but these are difficult conversations to have. So what do you see as the role of lawyers? And then maybe talk about the unique challenges to addressing this issue.
I think that the roles of lawyers, and all lawyers, whether they be minority or not minority, is having the time to look around the room, as that Twitter that Sarah just mentioned, Justice Liddell just mentioned, and say, who's in the room with me? Whoever it may be. I always do, whether it's a planning committee to the CLE, or it is an ABA subcommittee on dealing with any issue. It doesn't matter what the issue is, but you take that step, you look around the room and go, who's here and who's missing? And that's upon all of us, whether you're a minority or not a minority. You have to take that time to look around. And I call to action the lawyers that are listening in today, who I'm sure sit on a whole role of different roles, whether it's a legal role or a civic organization, a Rotary Club, their church organization, or their role as lawyers on a trial team. Look around and say, what is missing and what can we bring to make this more of a complete? And then when they see it incomplete, have the courage, because it does take courage. This conversation is difficult, saying we're missing diversity. We're missing women. We're missing Asians. We're missing those who are disabled. We are missing, and sometimes we can say, this is a room full of Hispanics and we need some white people in the room. I mean, the tables can be turned. We can't have this conversation. So, and it can't just all be women. Every women organization I know wants men in it. So it has to be that conversation. And I call to them to sit around and look at that committee and look at that room and see what's missing in their room.
Can I follow up on that? Because I think it's such a great point. And once you get everybody in the room, make sure you hear from those people in the room. So if you're sitting in a room with a diverse group of people, but only one group is speaking, to reach out to the other members of the group and make sure that their voices are being heard too. And I think that's just effective meeting leadership, but it's something just to pause for a second and not, reach decisions without talking to everybody who's there.
And I'll say this, just agreeing with what my colleagues have said, but if you're going to evaluate who's missing, then do that with a critical eye toward what the role of the missing person is. Having sat on an appellate bench for a couple of decades, it is obvious to me when someone is invited to sit at counsel table because the case involves an issue that is particularly that lawyers perceive might be particularly important or relevant to a particular community. Let's look at who's missing and let's involve them outside of those cases. And when you involve them, make sure that you prepare them. There is, in my experience, sometimes lawyers of color are brought in just for a specific case, or they're sent down to argue something without adequately preparing them. We're going to talk about this later, but when you see moot court participation and mock trial, there is also a dearth of diversity in those programs in law schools. And so you don't have that same pipeline. Make sure that when you look at who's missing, you evaluate their role critically, and then you help prepare them. In my view, that's important, and it's something that I've noticed over the years. And I'm not talking about any case in particular. It's just what I've seen over the years. You all want to follow up on that, Justice Landau or Justice Benavides?
I agree. I mean, you want if you are being inclusive, you want that included person to be set up for success.
I agree.
All right. And what do you see as, I guess, unique challenges to addressing diversity, Justice Benavides, outside of what we've already mentioned, or Justice Landau, before I move on to our own roles? Do you have anything? I do think there are a lot of challenges. Is there anything you want to add to that?
I think that there's a huge challenge, because then once you're in the room, you have then, it becomes a bigger responsibility if you're the one in the room to carry that forward. You have to, I've always told, when we started out, Justice Guzman, just a couple of years ago, there was not a times when we were the only females in the room. Forget being the only female of color in a room. And so that always, I felt, always required me to be more prepared, more able to carry that load that I feel I was not only carrying for myself, but for those who came behind me. And that's a huge challenge to have, not to only open the door, but to keep the door open. And that I knew that my failure would then lead. I'll tell a really quick caveat story. When I joined Adams and Graham in 1988, I was only the second, I was actually the third. They hired like 2 or 3 females all in once, because it was all male and all white male when I joined that firm. And one of the reasons they gave me that they didn't hire females is they had a previous female lawyer who didn't do well. And they just then assumed that all of us would do as badly as this one female did. And so I kept having to show them that I wasn't that female lawyer that had failed before, and had to overcome a lot. And it was hard. As a young, when I asked what the maternity leave on my first interview at Adams and Graham, they all looked at each other like I spoke a foreign language, and then asked what they did for their secretaries. And I went, wait. So we've come a long way, but there's still a long way to still go.
Justice Landau, any unique experiences or challenges as you've practiced in your different career?
Yes. A lot of times you kind of see the issue, but you're not quite sure what to do about it. I noticed in the federal bar, there was a real lack of diversity and inclusion issue. And I sort of struggled with what to do about that. Like, how do I connect with lawyers who I'd like to recruit to the federal bar and federal practice? So that's actually how I started teaching, because I wasn't sure how stocked the pipeline was with the kinds of people I was hoping to practice alongside.
And as you've reviewed the cases in the Court of Appeals, and particularly the criminal cases, is there anything that you notice about how people of color are represented in the appellate space, and drawing more on your years as a public defender, I suppose?
We definitely, in a couple ways. We talked about experiential diversity, and frequently I noticed as a defender that I was practicing in front of judges who had very little or no experience in the criminal area. And it's sometimes a little extra hard to make your case to a judge who is not familiar with your practice area. I also noticed that a lot of times the lawyers were not representative of, and I, guilty, were not representative of their clients, in that the lawyers were frequently white, and the clients were frequently not. So I think, that's partly why I thought we should try and diversify our federal appellate practice.
And I think that goes hand in hand with that, Justice Guzman, and it's not a discussion we have time for today, but I'd like to bring it up, is the implicit bias that then occurs. If we don't have that diversity, and I think what Justice Landau mentions is, and then we end up with that implicit bias that we have, and we have to recognize that we all have it, and then it affects the decisions of the judiciary, which then we all know then affects, especially in the criminal justice system. And I know that our Supreme Court has been fighting that for years, of creating that unequal, and we need criminal reform. And it all wraps itself around once. It's hard to be arguing whether it's at the Fifth Court or our own Court of Criminal Appeals when all the judges are former prosecutors, and you don't got a public defender in there.
Tell me about it.
It's hard. I mean, it's hard that they're all former prosecutors, and you're a public defender, and the same thing is for the Fifth Circuit. And how do you address that if they've never been there, knowing that you have a guy who's constitutional, or girls whose rights were violated, and how do you prove that? And how do you convince those prosecutors of that?
Perspective matters. I want to get to the second half of the PowerPoint presentation, which Justice Landau is going to
okay.
handle.
We probably have a 5-minute wiggle room, so I don't want to cut you off too soon.
Okay, well, good. Then we'll touch on a couple of things. Then I just make sure you have enough time to do that. But what are some of the challenges that you have seen or feel lawyers of color face within the legal profession? And I'll just start, and I tweeted about this, so I'll share it again, but the phrase qualified minority. So I'm on the call, and the conversation is, well, we should be more diverse. Where can we find a qualified minority? And that the presumption is everyone has to be qualified. So if we could all lose that, focus and just say, where can we find diverse candidates? Obviously, if a candidate doesn't meet the criteria, then you're not going to consider them for the position. But to begin with the presumption that you've got to go out into the community of lawyers of color and try to, find one who's qualified. To me, that's starting from a different place, and it's been that way for a long time. But I try to encourage the conversation to begin with. We have this wonderful, amazing community of qualified lawyers. Let's see which one, fits the firm culture, or can meet these clients' needs, and begin to treat the community as you would other communities. And Justice Benavides?
Well, I think that's very imperative when we're doing hiring, whether it's one of our interns at the court or one of our staff attorneys or many of the lawyers that are on. One of the things that we discussed when we were preparing for today is what you see on your resume. And Justice Landau and I talked about how we look for people that kind of look for us, right? As our staff attorneys, but you have to kind of get out of your comfort zone and look for other things. I told a story about an intern that I had several years ago who on paper did not look good. I'd be the first to admit. And both my senior staff attorney, my attorneys were like, really, Judge? This person was male and had come from the community. So he was a local boy and had been kind of known in the college as a little party boy. Grades weren't great, but I had this opening, and he applied. He really wanted it. He had made that extra effort, and I said, I'm going to give him a chance. And he ended up being one of my best interns I ever had. His grades weren't there, and normally it wouldn't have gone past, but he took one extra step, and then I took the step with him. I took the ability to look outside of the academic record and outside of what normally I look for in a candidate, and ended up to have one of the best judicial interns. And I think he's a great lawyer. So you just sometimes have to look outside of what we normally look at in order to get that diversity we need in our firms and in our court.
Thank you, Justice Landau.
Yes, I think it's easy to look for a candidate, whether you're hiring for an internship or hiring a lawyer, to look for somebody who has kind of been on the treadmill that you expect them to be on. But I think sometimes you can miss out on some really great candidates when you do that, because sometimes what makes somebody a great lawyer is that time they took off the track, or their first career, or that they are hustling incredibly hard because they're a first generation lawyer, any number of things. And so when I look at a resume, because everybody's had a candidate who looked so perfect on paper, but they didn't quite work out in practice, maybe try another approach in addition to your usual one, which is look for somebody who's interesting on paper. Do they have a lot of community involvement? What kinds of experiences have they had? Some of the strongest law students I had when I taught were former teachers. And I really enjoyed they were great advocates because they were used to having to advocate for their students. So, the qualified minority is, I would love also to retire that. Let's just, see if we can get a great batch of candidates with diverse backgrounds, and the rest kind of flows from that, I think.
Yes.
And I'd also like to eradicate they went to Harvard. Well, that must have been because they're a person of color, and just these assumptions. Yeah. And I hear them, and I'm a person of color. So we all have to keep ourselves in check. Look, we all have implicit biases, or we have preconceived notions of why certain groups behave a certain way or accomplish certain things. But I think that the challenge for us as a legal community is to recognize these biases and to set them aside. And so I hope that if you catch yourself about to articulate that someone went to Harvard, likely because of, they're a person of color, that you change that mindset some. And I think we're at the place where we can talk. It's a topic we could go on and on about. It's an important topic. Law firms all over the country are addressing diversity. There are a number of resources that we've identified, and I think Justice Landau might put those together and email out a link about the different resources and that sort of thing. But Justice Landau, are you ready?
I think so. Aha, here we are. I think Alex is going to put there was a big wad of links I put together, and I'll try and tie them to the resources part of the presentation as I go through to highlight it for you. Just to give you a little bit of where I'm coming from, I'm not here offering these resources from on high saying I've got it all together, so get with the program, people. That's not my perspective. Instead, I am kind of here in the trenches with you. I am working on it. And this is just some things to help you kind of on-ramp to something so you can kind of lead from where you stand. This is not also an exhaustive list. Like Justice Guzman said, we could go on for a long time and I could give you a giant book of resources, but for me, giant book of resources is intimidating. So I tried to just give a sampler, if you will, of what we've got. So I've talked a little bit about teaching, and I realize this is a big ask for people, but I'm just putting it out there in case it appeals to you. That is a wonderful way to help create a pipeline of wonderful students who you can get to know, and maybe you will hire them. I did that, and it was a wonderful decision for me and for the court. I can't really say enough good things about teaching. If you're a legal research and writing buff, as many of us are in the appellate world, that's an easy go-to. There are frequently adjunct opportunities at our local schools. But if that doesn't appeal to you, there are a lot of adjunct opportunities teaching other subjects of your subject matter area expertise. And like I said, that's a big ask. If that feels like too much, which it may, there are other on-ramps for getting involved in inclusion and diversity. The State Bar has a number of great resources that I'll dive into in more detail in a moment. The Houston Bar Association also, and there are sort of different bar associations that are not affiliated with the state or local bars, but all of them provide you a way to mentor law students and young lawyers, and a way for, if this is just like, whoa, blowing your mind, like where do I even begin? There are resources through the state and local and separate bars that will kind of help you do that as well. Okay, so one place to look, because I think that the younger part of the profession is more diverse, mentoring those folks is a great way to foster diversity and inclusion. The Young Lawyers Associations has some great events. I didn't see that COVID is sort of impacting some of this work. Not everybody is able to put on Zoom events and have them work smoothly and seamlessly as the Houston Bar Association is. But keep your eyes peeled for the Young Lawyers Association events. That's a great way to meet young lawyers. The Office of Minority Affairs at the State Bar has a whole host of programs that absolutely look wonderful, a few of which I've been involved with and can vouch for. The Leadership SBOT, it's designed to increase diverse participation in the legal community. And it's a year-long program involving training and presentation by young attorneys at the State Bar annual meeting. So if you encounter folks who are looking for some mentorship, this might be a good program to advise them to look at. The Texas Minority Council program has a CLE every year. It's usually in the fall, and you can sponsor that. You can work there and help them plan it. There are a lot of different ways to get involved with TMCP. The Diversity Forum is a 3-hour CLE presentation about diversity in the legal profession. That's more on the hiring lawyer, law firm end of things. And you can also direct folks to the local bar leaders presentation at the Diversity Summit, and they discuss ways to increase diversity. I think that I think it's Friday. It's coming up soon. So I think I put a link in the chat. And this one hits a little close to home. Both Justice Benavides and I are involved with the appellate section at the State Bar. And Justice Benavides co-chairs a diversity committee, and she authorized me to give you all her co-chair's contact information, which is in the chat. If you'd like to get involved with diversity at the State Bar level, I think that's a great way to on-ramp to that. Now, looking more locally, the Gender Fairness Committee has a great event coming up, the Virtual Speed Mentoring. I think they are still accepting speedy mentors. If you need help finding that, I can help you do that, but I think there's a link at least to the page in the chat, and that event is February 24th, 4 to 6 p.m. Something that I'm very excited to participate in at the First Court of Appeals is the Diversity and Inclusion Summer Clerkship and Mentoring Program. I think it used to be called the MOILP, so it's changed, and I have a link in the chat for that. Basically what it is it's a way to help select diverse interns, and you will be given resumes and application packages, and you're not committing to hire any particular person. You're just committing to consider a group of folks that the HBA puts together for you. And I believe that if I'm not mistaken, I think that time has closed to participate in that as an employer. It kind of kicks off toward the end of the year, and the students are about to submit their application packages. Another program that you have HBA and HYLA, they do supervised practice matching, which is a great way to mentor students. And finally, the communities and schools, HBA partners with them to provide paid work to high school students who could not otherwise afford to work in an area that might be kind of on a career path for them. And there are a lot of different ways you can get involved with the communities and schools. And I've given you all the email address of the HBA chair for that particular committee. You can provide a place of work. You can underwrite a scholarship so that a high school student who could not otherwise afford to do so can work somewhere. I know that the district attorney's office has almost unlimited opportunities for high school students to work with them, but they obviously don't have the budget to pay. So if you wanted to underwrite something like that, that would be a wonderful contribution. Okay, now we have some other bar associations that are not part of the state bar, not part of the HBA. MABA, the Mexican American, oops, I skipped a slide. Sorry about that. First one is Women of Law. And I went to an event hosted by these folks and I was amazed at the turnout. They absolutely did such a great job promoting the event. It was a networking event. I checked in with them and they said that they're kind of on hiatus during COVID, but I have their website in the chat and I would definitely keep an eye on them. Along with the Association of Women Attorneys, long-standing organization. They have wonderful, wonderful programming. I think we heard in the introduction that they honor Justice Guzman. And they're definitely a great organization to get involved with too. Then we have the diverse bar associations, ABA, SABA, Houston Lawyers Association, Mexican American Bar Association of Houston, HISBA, the Hispanic Bar Association of Houston. And I'd like to highlight a new thing. Both Justice Benavides and I are involved with the National Association of Women Judges. And several of us are starting locally a program for high school students, hopefully expanding to college and law schools. I'm sorry, for law school students, hopefully expanding backward to high school and college students, called Color of Justice. And it's an informational presentation. And it's so new that we don't have a website or a flyer just yet. But keep your eyes peeled for that. And this just crossed my desk as we were getting ready to come on today. If you're trying to figure out how to mentor in this strange pandemic time, this looks like a wonderful free event. And I believe I put the link for that in the chat as well, if you would like to register. So those are all of our resources.
Those are great resources. I think we have a couple of questions in the chat, and I think we have 2 minutes. I'll take the first question from Scott Rothenberg. As chair of the SBOT CLE committee, we want to improve diverse participation. We don't always know which prospective CLE speakers are diverse. Best suggestions, I would say work with the minority bar associations. And again, this takes a real, a real effort to cultivate those relationships and then train the lawyers. I mean, there's a couple of young lawyers that become experts in a particular field. If you see a lawyer of color that practices in a particular arena and has really, really become an expert in the field, work with them to develop them as potential CLE speakers. But I would suggest working with the bars. And then the other question I'll leave for Justice Benavides or Justice Landau, and I'll chime in if I need to. And that's, does recognizing diverse political views play a role when a court is dominated by one side of the spectrum or the other? My hot take is politics has no business in the courtroom. And that's whether you run in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. That's been my experience. But Justice Benavides, Justice Landau?
I can kind of take that one. I think it has no place in the courtroom, but in terms of advocacy, I think it's helpful to have people on your team who align with the judges you're arguing in front of. So I think it has a place maybe on your team, if not in the courtroom. Again, the diversity of perspectives.
I agree. I mean, we can have a whole nother discussion on judicial selection, and the commission just came out with his report, and everybody knows exactly where I stand because I testified to, and it's been it's been reported everywhere. But I think it does, to the extent that a political party at times designation also means a lack of diversity. Not always, but sometimes it does. And so, and whether it's all R or RD, because our court has been all D at various times, and it can definitely have that effect. So, but I think that if you look at it even closer, the party affiliation also has a cultural and a geographical diversity, which I think is more important than the party affiliation. And so I think that in the big picture of thing, that's probably at the bottom of concerns of diversity on the court.
I'm going to agree with, yeah, it's not high on the spectrum of the, I think where we can begin the conversation about improving diversity in the appellate bar. But I thank you for the question, because lawyers do think about this, so it's not an unimportant question. And that concludes our presentation. I will invite my co-panelist to give any closing comment if you wish. From my perspective, just thank you so much for beginning the conversation and for taking the time to engage each other on this important question.
I agree. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's nice to be in Houston without being in Houston, even though I miss traveling. And I look forward to the day where we can all be in the same room again.
Thank you. I really enjoyed doing this. Thank you for having me, and I really appreciated being part of this wonderful panel.
Well, on behalf of the appellate section, thank you all so much for taking the time to be here and speak about this important topic. And we all anyone who's joined this presentation and watched this is concerned about the issue, but you really gave us some very helpful practical action items about what we can do beyond just talking about diversity. What can we actually do? So I thank you for that. And that's something as a bar we're going to continue to try to work on. So please join us next month on February 11th. We will have Joe Larson from Gregor Cassidy, PLLC. He is going to be speaking on sovereign immunity, declaratory judgments, and open government. So thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you.